So this was really about Blacks in government and mostly focusing on Black mayors. And, you know, intermixed in that is local elected officials that represent the legislative aspects of government, more so at the congressional level. And so, yes, we have grown in government over the years, and everyone knows what an elected official is someone that gets chosen through the electoral process by registered voters. And so over the years, I think there has been a struggle with how Blacks have chosen to govern, whether small, medium, or large cities, medium-sized or large cities, and or whether or not they bring home the quote unquote bacon for their districts. And so one of the aspects that I've done over the years is done a study on first-time mayors, and now we're in the realm for Black elected officials of not just first time anymore. It's becoming the norm, with the exception of just having the first Supreme Court justice appointed and confirmed. That's a first. But going through the elected officials process, we have a couple of medium-sized cities such as Boston who have only gotten to their first, but going on through the years, you know, Black elected officials have now reached a point where they are becoming comfortable in certain cities with getting elected, but they haven't always gotten it right. Some have, some haven't. And so in order to normalize what works and what doesn't, we sort of put together a little public policy track to get us the best benefit. So instead of evaluating Black mayors' performance, the conversation that's focused on what Black mayors are most likely to spend public dollars on versus their counterparts. And so there hasn't been one uniform approach. And so what I've done was list some first-time Black mayors, analysis that revealed the city size measured by total population, the racial makeup, and you know, whether or not what types of offices they held previously. So that's pretty much what I've done. And I determined what era were they coming into office, whether it was a civil rights era, the post-civil rights era, post-racial era. And we know we went through a period in the 80s and 90s where they said, well, you know, we're more inclusive in society now, so we're in this post-racial era. And so the most important are their philosophical views, their attitude and style of governance. And so the research question here is, what style of leadership should Black political candidates adopt if they want the job of mayor? Or what style of leadership should Black mayors adopt in order to effectively serve Black interests without compromising other constituents? And this remains a consistent question because we, in between, say in New York City, it's been a long time since we were able to elect a second mayor because it was perceived that we were constantly in racialized politics, and we have a lot of classism as well, where we have a lot of poor whites, poor Asians, poor Latinos. And so only focusing on Black politics sort of compartmentalize the issues when we really were universal in our way of thinking, or should have been universal in our way of thinking. And so when you look at the first types of Blacks that were elected to mayor, they mostly focus on racialized because it was a post-civil rights era. And this was sort of a continuation from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s for the racialized era. The one mayor that didn't go to racial politics actually lost, right? Went through a deracialized process. And so styles of leadership is defined as the most important proposals, initiatives, and public policies that elected officials and or political candidates have advocated for, campaigned on as a candidate, or implemented while in office. So as I said, it's a racialized approach, it's a universal approach, and a deracial approach. And a universal style of leadership, which is what we're advocating towards now, which we've been on since 2000, is defined as universalizing Black interests, which translates into adopting public policies that benefit all racial and ethnic rather than place ethnic groups' interests over another on its surface. And so we try to strike a balance between the two. And so Black mayors are a bit more in tune with the rhetoric that convinces people that everything is okay, and incisive in terms of employing the right programs to elevate the coalition rather than scratching the surfaces. So what does this mean and why is this important? It's important because as gentrification increases in our city and our cities become more inclusive, with more Asians, more Latinos, and again, more Blacks moving all around to find this affordable balance, we know that Blacks are moving to more medium-sized cities or in cities that are large but are not in the majority. And so if they want to continue to advance the agenda for Blacks in government or to continue to appoint Blacks to key positions in government, it's important that they think about this coalition style of building. And so what are some of these public policy promises that have been on? The most important now is the community investment promises that we are trying to accomplish. And this is not just in New York City, this is also in, as opposed to just urban areas, it's also in rural areas. And I heard Professor Price saying a little something along those lines, and what this translate into is to invest more. And this is what translate into more people being able to feel comfortable electing Black leadership, whether or not they're in the majority or not. So when there is a progressive agenda in terms of public education, transportation, energy, parks, youth development, small business development, urban and rural development, and public health, especially in the post-pandemic era, you start to see when there's a composition of who's going to choose between the two, whether it's a Black candidate or a white candidate, the Black candidate can win and often does win because they are now in the community investment or universal side of politics. When if they're at the bottom and their interest in terms of politics and economics and social agendas, if they're at the bottom, their interest tends to benefit all individuals. So I can answer more questions down the line, but I'm sorry, I have to run for a few minutes. I'll be back. Thank you.